Privet, Katila, wanting Ruski desu. So today, I recently saw an article that the new Austrian government will be composed of the conservative right-wing party, led by Sebastian Kurz, and the Green Party. And a quote from Kurz himself said that we can protect the environment and borders. And to which I say, the Green Right rises, as a quote from Bain. So I made a video a few months back on why environmentalism is an inherently right-wing idea, more so than it is even a left-wing idea. And in this video, I wanted to explain more on what exactly a right-wing green movement should look like and what it would advocate for. So, as the effects of climate change become more graver and graver, and we as a society try to come to terms with the massive changes that our industrial and technological society brings to our world, I think it is important to lay out why right-wing politics, combined with an understanding of ourselves and the environment, has the answers, to these questions and problems. Borders are the environment's greatest ally. A quote from Jordan Bardella from France's National Rally Party had said. So, rooted within right-wing thought and the nationalist conservative movement is a preservation, or you could say conserving, the natural beauty of nature against the forces of rapid, unchecked, and frankly destructive progress. Another aspect is the idea of objective beauty, that there is an objective standard both aesthetically and morally, and that we uphold, and the idea of the local, the untouched land, the rural life. This is like this is a big part of right-wing thought, to help preserve our environment from the forces of unchecked materialism and consumerism. Being for the environment is not only a sound right-wing position, I would further argue that it is a necessity to adopt for any right-winger worth his or her salt. The nationalist right has both a principled and moral reason to protect the land. What does the left wing bring to the table? So, there is a term in Europe called watermelon politics. Now, stay with me here. Basically, it's a term saying that the so-called green parties are supposedly green on the outside, but what really holds them together on the inside is red for socialism. Essentially, the left wing don't have the answers to the nation's environmental problems. For example, if we look at AOC's so-called Green New Deal, it was more so a radical push for her democratic socialist agenda in the economy, and fighting climate change was just a pretext for her economic plans. Most environmental movements have been hijacked and are, simply pushed to overthrow capitalism, or they're used as a grudge against first world developed nations, which leads to a lot of people saying that the environment does not matter. But what we need to do is not give this moral high ground to the left, but take back our rightful mantle of protecting and conserving our environment, just as we conserve our traditions, our homeland, and our culture. So what does this new era of right-wing environmentalism bring to the table? Just as there needs to be a synthesis between the rights of capital and the rights of workers, a fusion between traditional private markets and the well-being and sustainability of the people, the workers, and the nation at large, so too do we need to have a fundamental synthesis between our way of life, our lifestyles, and nature. We need to also have a fundamental understanding that we are not separate from nature, but rather attached to it. That the land that is beneath our feet nurtures us, and in turn we must nurture it as, say, God's shepherds of the world, so to speak. So just as you are not an atomized individual, that you are part of a greater people, a history, a culture, so too are you connected to the soil, and we must maintain and be in harmony with nature. And there needs to be a balance between humanity's need to live a productive and fulfilling life and making sure nature is not, we don't bulldoze over it in the name of progress. So the goal of the right-wing environmental in a nutshell is thus, how can we best achieve a way where we can maintain our traditional environmental systems, but in the modern way of technology, cities, and the way we consume stuff in our lifestyles? But firstly, a few dogmas need to be disbanded. So firstly is the idea that we just exist to just consume and produce. The idea of just unfettered growth needs to come to an end. Another dogma that needs to be dismantled is that there is no such thing as a common good, and that collective action is somehow evil. We can do great things when the right people are in charge and the willpower and resources are there. But in the West, and especially in America, we cannot just forget that there is a greater purpose and calling to us than just, there's more to this life, our lives, than just we go to our cubicle and then we come back and to jerk into porn back in our little pod. There's more to life than this. There's a common good beyond just your individual life. And those are the two dogmas that we need to disband. So, firstly, the nationalists who run in their nation states need to stand up and declare that nations themselves are their own unique type of ecosystems in a way. They have their own unique identities, which I have explained before in other videos. And to preserve them, and not just that, but also preserve the environment of that, we need to have strong, strict borders, because strong and strict borders are the best way for an ecosystem to thrive, as it can control what can come in, like how a cell can control what comes into the cell and such. The biggest singular pro-environment policy we can do is immigration restriction. The left always talks about how we can regulate a person's CO2 emissions, right? So how can we change what this person eats? How do we change how they transport themselves around? How can we regulate their energy usage? But do you know what's the best way to limit that person's environmental footprint? By not having them in the country in the first place. So the sole reason in the West that we have population growth at all is because of immigration. If we put in place measures to limit immigration, we can drastically lower our environmental footprint by having less people come and consume in our country. Because this gives us we have to ask ourselves a few questions, like, why do we need to tear up our natural land and clutter our cities and towns with more housing? We have to put more people in our classrooms, more people into our hospitals. Why do we need more cars on our streets? Why? If we stop immigration and have a basic pro-natal policy where the native population has a replacement rate of about 2.1, we can actually decrease and slow runaway population growth and have it go down to a slow and steady flat rate. And thus, because of that, we can achieve security without changing our country and ruining our environment in the process. So as I mentioned before, nationalism gives that moral foundation for environmental protection. Just as when we want to preserve our culture from multiculturalism, for example, there's a basic moral argument in that our culture should be preserved, not mixed away, in a sense. So that's why, when we think about nationalism and conservation, as I mentioned in my other videos, it's just a natural part of right-wing thought to conserve the culture, conserve the homeland, and thus, in an extension, conserve the natural beauty. And that's what allows us hey, we don't want more people coming into our country. So it goes without saying that you want to protect your land, right? It's one of the biggest things of your nation. Plus, it is much easier to get people to care about the world around them when you talk in terms of local issues, instead of far-reaching global ones, where it is more theoretical, instead of something that everyday people can see with their own two eyes. So that's more of a practical. It gets people, instead of it being so convoluted on a global scale, focusing in on their local issues is what gets people actually animated and actually caring. And it's actually something they could change too. So the next thing that this right-wing environmentalism needs to bring together is to bring together the concerns of the environment versus the concerns of our economy, our industry. And to be honest, we need a radical reframing of our economic life. We have more plastic toys for cheap, but is that really making us happier? We're consuming high sugar and fatty foods, and we're just being careless as a society. What we need is to reorient our lives. It has to be a cultural shift towards a less materialistic realm and more towards a simpler life. That does not mean we need to stop using products or, there is no such thing as having a good quality of life, which is needed. But it's less of consuming and producing, as I mentioned before. It has to be less about how much more stuff we can get and consume more. It has to be more towards having a balance. And so we need to make our economy run in conjunction with nature. So my personal idea is implementing a carbon tax so that we tax the major polluters and then we redistribute the money in the form of a dividend to the people. And we allocate about 20% of the carbon tax revenue to funds to research and development and green technology. This is a market-based solution to help reduce our effects on climate. Not only that, but what the right also should advocate for is self-sufficiency. So a collective effort in our whole nation to help more of our cities be more green. We could have like these self-run communes of people who could create their own electricity from solar or wind. They grow their own crops and livestock. They have a public land space, etc. And thus our nation as a whole can be self-sufficient and decarbonized, but from the ground up. So people are more connected to their local land, and thus we can have less pollution, less crowding, and instead of endless construction and growth, we gear our economy towards self-sufficiency and sustainability. Another thing I would add is that our cities themselves should be more green. That there should be more green spaces, be more livable. They have to be more than just soulless rectangles that we have now. We can have a collective societal effort to help us be more in tune with nature. From our electricity production to our agricultural system, to our ways of consuming, products, like how do we, in our production systems. We need more recycling, anti-littering, reforestation measures, greening projects, expanding and protecting our public parks. This will make our lives more in tune and livable with the natural world, while also making us more connected to the local and our nation, and it lets our nation be energy independent and self-sufficient. We can disagree on certain policies, but the overall goal should be the same of the right-wing environmental movement, which is a way to balance our way of life so that it is in tune with nature and we are a part of it instead of us being outside of nature and seeing it as our pig to exploit for endless growth and production. Just as the economic life should serve our people, it should also be in tune for our environment. Last thing I would add is that this so-called emerging green right should use the power of market forces and competition with government investment in innovating our way towards a better future. So in my opinion, I advocate for a federal science department, which is kind of like, how there's an EPA or something like that, but there'd be like a science department that would have a budget of about $40 billion a year. That will go towards researching technologies that are both practical and theoretical. And in this research, we could do things that could help us with our environment. Things like nuclear fusion, carbon capture, nanotech, and with government investment combined with private enterprise, we can be at the forefront of technologies that will allow us to better maintain this balance with nature, but also enhance our lives without affecting the environment. As I also mentioned earlier, there is one of the basic conservative principles, or just any sort of principle within right-wing ideology, is the idea of beauty, the idea of order. When there is order, we are this is what we're striving towards, an orderly world. Which is, I think we all understand that's one of the fundamental tenets of right-wing thought. One thing I will argue about that, though, is that in terms of trying to strive towards order, strive towards beauty, there is nothing more orderly and beautiful than the environment. And what we need to do is make sure that when we strive towards making sure, because when we look at the disorder of our industrial society, from trash to litter to just endless smog and pollution to the soulless, vapidness that is our way of life right now, we're so detached, so atomized. Our cities are soulless concrete. We need to reorient ourselves, because this is an abomination. We need to make sure our homes, our communities, our cities are not only more green just for being green's sake, but because they would represent a more beautiful, more in tune, more natural sort of way of life and to make ourselves feel more in a stable and orderly world and being for environmental protection is a complete contrast with the disorder of decay, anarchy, and of our current trajectory. So, to conclude, As climate change gets worse and an increasing population and runaway, unfettered materialist growth destroys our environment, we need a right-wing response to help combat environmental destruction and climate change. Nationalism provides us the moral basis in conserving our environment, and conservation has a rich history within the right-wing movement. With strong borders and immigration restrictions, a refocus of our economic lives to be more in tune with nature and less on materialist and consumer goods, and with the power of government and private enterprise, we can make the bold investments and make the innovations needed to help us improve our quality of life, but make sure we do it in an environmentally responsible way. We're going to leave our countries to our children a place where the water is clean, the air is fresh, there is no pollution, where they can enjoy the wide variety and beauty of our landscapes and biosphere. And instead of us being detached from nature, we are more in touch with it, from our cities to our homes. And, this will make our countries finally be self-sufficient, and instead of focusing on pure growth and, just for growth's sake, we focus on sustainability and stability. And the green right will rise and finally bring order to an increasingly disorderly world. So that was my video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe this video, or like this video and subscribe to my channel, I should say, and comment if whatever you guys want. And if you guys feel, especially if you really like my content, be sure to check out my Patreon to help me out. And be sure to share this video around. So aim high, wander on, from America with Russian love.